did not change. Welcome to the Call of Duty Comics panel at New York Comic Con 2021.
Woo!
This is extremely exciting for a few of us because I think for most of us here, the first time we met in person was getting off the plane and then getting to the hotel.
Yeah.
And we made a game together. And that's why. And a comic.
Yeah.
Funny enough?
So awesome.
It really is.
So we're gonna share with you guys the overall premise of what the comic is, along with a peek behind the curtain. We're gonna keep things focused on the comic itself. So even when we get to Q&A and you're gonna ask questions, please keep it limited to that. We want to focus as much on this as we can. It's something that I think all of us are heavily invested in, and it was a passion project for sure for me. I know Steven has wanted these comics for a while, so when this opportunity came up, it was super dope and super perfect. So let's talk a little bit about who we are, and we'll start at the very end there. Sam.
Oh, hi everybody. My name is Sam Maggs. I write video games, comic books, and novels. In addition to Call of Duty Vanguard, I've also done work for Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, Spider-Man for PlayStation, as well as comic books like Marvel Action Captain Marvel, Rick and Morty Ever After, Transformers Galaxies, a bunch of stuff. And books like The Unstoppable Wasp Built on Hope, and I was the writer of this comic. We all did the story, but I did the actual script writing because I was the one with previous comic experience, so it was kind of cool to get to share what making a comic script looks like with these very talented folks from other mediums.
Woo!
Oh, thanks, Mom.
And now I have to follow that. Oh my goodness.
Please. Don't you so much tell you that he's won 17 awards, as well as going to law school while also saving the planet's orphans on the moon. And so no one, you should go last. You should go last.
That's just me being Nigerian. That's really all that is. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tochio Nyobuchi. I helped out with the story for Call of Duty Vanguard. Novelist, essayist. The thing most people probably know me for is a little book called Riot Baby. I have an upcoming novel with Tor.com, Goliath. I also, this month, have a comic dropping. I'm doing Black Panther Legends with Marvel. It is a dream experience. Issue number 1 drops, I believe, either the 13th or the 14th. I should probably know this.
It's really good.
I'd say.
It's my heart. But yeah, video games, comics. I'm just trying to catch up to Sam here. And I think that's me. Yeah.
Morning, everyone.
Please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Rhodes. I'm the narrative lead for Call of Duty Vanguard, but I was also part of the story development team for the comic, the prequel comic that we've done. I don't have as near a longer resume as these two, but I worked on a bunch of games, probably the most famous ones being Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Witcher 3, the two of my big titles before I joined Sledgehammer. I'm just very excited to be here and to talk to you all about the comic and the game.
My name is Gabe Menendez, and I shot myself in the foot by going last. For Sledgehammer, I am the brand strategist. On the comic, I was the creative director, and I don't have a long list of accolades. I'm from Elizabeth, New Jersey. My parents are Cuban.
Elizabeth in the house.
But we're very, very excited to be here and to talk to you all about what we've been working on for a while now. Somebody who couldn't be here with us today because he's got some commitments to family back in California is our other writer, Brent Friedman. So can you tell us a little bit about Brent?
Yeah, so Brent's a terrific writer. He's a great friend of mine. He's worked on Call of Duty Vanguard from pretty much the beginning. So he's been a real instrumental part in our writing team on this game, but then he was also part of the story development team on the comic. And it was a great experience. The four of us working out together, and we're very sad that he's not here with us today, but we just like to give him a little shout out. So So he was in spirit.
Brent, if you're watching at home or later, we love you. We miss you.
Brent also just got nominated for like an Emmy, and
Yeah.
way more talented than everyone who's here, so sorry to
I
remind
know.
that
I
experience.
don't know.
Yeah.
I don't even know why I'm
We
here.
don't have time to do his actual.
It sounds like we're pouring one out for Brent, but like he's literally just
Top of the world.
Yeah, exactly.
No, he's
All
the
right.
greatest.
Who wants to tell us a little bit about the Vanguard story, a little bit about the game, and how it ties in to the comics themselves?
Steven does.
Yeah, no, he's our
Voted.
new fury. He's our new fury.
So Vanguard's story follows this group of remarkable individuals on screen there. Our characters in the game, and we follow them on a journey as they are sent on a top secret mission into Berlin towards the very end of the war. I'm going to be very careful not to spoil anything, because we haven't revealed a huge amount about the story yet. But the game focuses around their exploits in Germany on this mission to uncover this mysterious Project Phoenix. And at the same time, it's also a story about how this team came together and where they all came from and why they're on this team. And, you know, the greatest part about that was everyone got really, at the studio, everyone got really invested in these characters and who they were, and everyone really liked them, and that feeling extended all the way up to like the top of Activision, and so they, you know, they saw what we were doing, and they absolutely could do more if we could put more like story in the game, and we couldn't, unfortunately, because the game was already like in full production, and you know, timelines and schedules and budgets were already planned, so you know, we floated the idea of, well, what if we did a comic to kind of tell a part of the story we weren't able to fit into the game, so that's what the comic focuses on. It's a key part of the team's story and the story of Vanguard, but it's one that we tell exclusively in this series of prequel comics that will come out before the game launches.
It's wild because you wouldn't imagine that a big company like Activision would have little pockets of grassroots things, startups, right? And that's what this comic has been at its very core. And to be able to, this is our first weekend holding the physical copies in front of us. And it's super surreal to know that those conversations all turned into something. We made it happen, it's here.
Yes,
We did it.
So who connects everybody together? What's the connective tissue within the comics?
So there's this character called Butcher, who is
No, give his full name.
his code name is Carver Butcher.
Carver Butcher.
That's actually his birth name.
2 types of filet meats in one name.
The birth was very difficult.
A C-section, if I remember correctly.
I know this is canon, don't write this down.
That's now on the wiki. It's too late, man. It's too late.
Oh well.
Robert Butcher's mother had a
We'll have to
very
change the
difficult
story.
C-section. His name is going to be Eric.
Yeah, Eric Butcher. No, Butcher originally was a character from World War II, the Call of Duty game, previously done by Sledgehammer. And when we were pulling this story together, we were looking if there were any elements from that game that we could kind of keep and that would be a nice sort of nod to the studio past. And Butcher was sort of brought up as this, well, what if there's, you know, this team needs recruiting, what if Butcher was the one who does the recruiting? So we built this fiction around a sub-branch of the SOE, which was an actual organization during World War II, and we called it the SOTF, where Butcher was basically going around the world finding soldiers with unique abilities and unique skills who'd done really heroic things, but were kind of not recognized by the traditional military systems, like people who weren't doing things that the military necessarily agreed with or supported, and he would find the worth in those people and bring them together to form these teams. And our team that we saw before, their team in Vanguard, they were the first. So it really is this journey of seeing the birth of special forces as the war comes to a close. So that's his role in all this. And then in the comics, the prequel comics, we see Butcher going to find all the different team members and trying to convince them to join this initiative, and that's ultimately what each issue kind of goes into based on which character is in that issue.
And I think what's really cool about it is you don't need to read the comic to enjoy the game. There's enough there in the game that you kind of get who the characters are while you're playing, and it's totally fine. But if you are the kind of person who enjoys getting more into depth with your playable characters in games, comics are such a great medium for being able to delve a little deeper into the interiority of the characters and like their personalities and a more like quieter, like there's still a lot of action in the comic, but it's less action focused than a video game where you're like shoot 24/7. And so it was cool to be able to delve into each of these characters and how and why they were recruited and to see them in their natural habitat before they're all together. And so if you do read the comic before coming to the game, you're going to have a really unique perspective and an interesting and more well-developed perspective on who these people are before you even meet them and turn on the game, which I love.
Yeah, and that was part of the initial pitch decks when we started the project. Was that if Call of Duty comes up, we wanted to tell a story that was guns down, and that was like the core pillar that I was afraid would get lost at some point, because some of the other COD, like the Black Ops prequels and stuff like that, the comics all had a lot of shoot bang bang, and it was cool that they let us take the full vision to fruition without really altering what we had hoped to accomplish at the very beginning.
And we should shout out the artist too, Piotr.
Piotr Kowalski has done some
Yeah.
amazing work, and
Yeah.
along with our colorist Brad Simpson, they're a tag team. And I remember looking for colors at the beginning when we started talking to Piotr. He's like, I know this guy is very good. His name is Brad Simpson. And it was a no-brainer the second we saw the work. They did the Bloodborne comics. Yeah, I'm blanking on a lot of the names. It's because the one that I'm thinking is like more NC-17, so I'm not going to say that one. But he's done really good stuff.
Let's just say he's got range.
He's got range.
He's got
Very
range.
range.
Very well. And he's a blast to work with.
Yeah, I was working like on the cover with him, and like we gave him the idea, and then it came back like almost fully formed.
Almost
fully
like
realized like exactly how I pictured it. And, like,
The only difference was there was a lot
there
of
were way
bodies.
more bodies.
Yeah.
There were way more bodies.
When I presented the cover to him, so Stephen and I had a couple of cover discussion meetings, and we're just geeking out on the possibilities, because they're endless. Like comics, you don't have to worry about, like I think Coach and I have discussed this, you don't have to worry about like visual budgets or anything like that. You're just getting somebody to draw it and then color it.
All you have to worry about is pissing off an artist.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, like Piotr told me that a couple times with a couple of other ideas. He goes, "This is a really good idea, but there's too much detail and I don't have time."
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, so he gave it back to us, the pencils, and it was just covered in a sea of bodies, which was initially what I told him, and then I shared it with Steven, and I was like, I want to gut check with you here, and he goes, yeah, there's too many bodies. I was like, okay, I'm glad you see it, because we wanted to have it like more hyperbolic with what the covers showed, but yeah, it was atrocious.
It was John Wick at the nightclub.
I like it. I thought we should have gone with it. I thought it was accurate.
This one's cool. He told me a few years ago that I'd be like determining which way Nazi bodies were facing and blood splatter directions, stuff like that. I wouldn't have believed you, but yeah, that was a big chunk of my job this time. So it's neat. All right, let's talk through some more of the characters that are involved in comics in the game. Sam, would you like to talk about Paulina?
Yeah, so Paulina Petrova is our character who is our sniper in the game. She is a Soviet woman who has learned how to snipe from a young age for reasons that will later be revealed. And she is based on real-life soldiers in World War II who were Russian women snipers. There were over 2,000 Soviet women who operated as high-tier snipers during World War II, and one in particular, Lyudmila, was the most deadly sniper in the entire war, with over 308 confirmed kills. So that was sort of the loose inspiration for Paulina, and she's going through it. She's going through a lot. She's from Stalingrad, which famously was invaded and lost to the Germans. You can imagine that things have not gone super well for her lately, and she's got an eye for vengeance and deals with her trauma with a very wry sense of humor. And she's not really a team player. It's not really her jam. And she's played by the magnificent Laura Bailey in the video game, who is a genius and should play every character.
I think there were a lot more Paulina's names than I anticipated. Once that teaser dropped.
I knew from the jump that Paulina was going. Yeah, no, like Paulina.
No more marketing.
Like it's absolutely like what Sam did in developing the Paulina character is literally like,
That's very kind of that's very kind of you. She's just super fun to write.
Yeah.
She's angry, bitter, and funny, and weird, and wants to murder Nazis. I love that for her.
we love to
Huge
see
thing.
it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
We love to see it.
So you talk to me about Arthur Kingsley.
Oh my goodness, my boy Arthur. Arthur Kingsley is, a lot of the inspiration for his character came from a lot of the black soldiers, particularly black British soldiers that served not just in World War II, but in both World Wars. And I think one of the really cool themes about Vanguard, particularly the comic, and this is something that Stephen touched on, is that it was a way to really highlight a lot of the stories that existed in the shadows of the official narrative of World War II. These people are, in one way or another, outcasts. They're people that are outside the system, so to speak. And with Arthur in particular, we had an opportunity to really dive into the story of someone who comes into a leadership role while there's all this sort of ambient prejudice that he has to deal with. And what does that look like on a thematic level? What does that look like on a personal level? Arthur is a black Brit of West African descent, and he is, the stuff that I'm getting incoherent because I love this character.
He's
so
an
much.
amazing villain. He's so smart. He's
Oh.
so interesting.
And
yeah.
he's got zingers.
Yeah.
He does have
Oh, he's got zingers. But yeah, diving into sort of his origin story with regards to this squad in the comic was a singular joy because we got to really, really, really show off this character that I don't think we see enough of in games and in comics. And it was an honor to help develop him and it was really cool. It was really, I'm normally more articulate than this, but I love this character so much in this comic, and that's Arthur Kingsley. I cannot wait for y'all to meet Arthur Kingsley.
I feel like you're gonna hear us gush about each other a lot, but the ironic thing is that the story of this game is this ragtag team of strangers coming together to do great things, and that is the story of this team as well, where Steven assembled all of us together from all over the industry, and we came together to make this thing, and we're all genuinely really good buds now, and have formed a really great bond, and it's so fun to make art with people that you just genuinely really love. And I think that's why, Tochi said, we're all a little incoherent about this, because despite the fact that none of us probably ever thought we would be here talking about a Call of Duty comic book, where this is something that we're all super, super proud of. And so please forgive us our overwhelming excitement about this, because we're just
It's literally a team of misfits telling a story about a team of misfits.
yeah, that's right.
Who saved the world?
We just made it up.
Yeah.
Who wants to tell us about Wade?
I can talk about Wade. So Wade Jackson is an American fighter pilot. And his whole deal is that he thinks he's the best. And partly because he is the best. But because of that, there comes a level of arrogance with Wade, and he famously takes part in the Battle of Midway, and that's where that's his claim to fame, and he did very heroic things in Midway that he might get to experience in the game. And so when he's pulled onto this team, he kind of feels like he should be in charge, or that he shouldn't have to take orders from these other people. And his journey is one of, he's kind of got the reverse journey, I think, of everyone else, where everyone else is learning to sort of,
self-confidence.
Yeah,
Yes.
grow and gain that self-confidence, whether it's to be a leader or a team player. And I think Wade is more of a humbling journey of him realizing that, okay, he's amazing when he's on his own, but how much better could he be if he had a team of like-minded people with him who could help? And that's kind of his journey. But yeah, Wade's very polarizing. I think you either love Wade or you hate him, because he's very sarcastic and very sure of himself. He's very strong-willed.
Is it tricky to write a character that will be polarizing, right? Because I think in a lot of ways you want people to love your baby, but what happens when you're writing a baby that you want people to hate or to be unsure of?
I think one of the interesting things with Wade is because a lot of World War II media, games included in the past, has always focused on the very American-centric perspective of the war and how the Americans, they rolled into Europe and the Pacific, and so it was interesting to, when we were looking at what our characters would be, I thought it would be really interesting to have an American character who was kind of not seen as like the like all bells and whistles hero, and he kind of has a much more self-reflective journey. Because I don't think we get to see that very often when we look at the American perspective of the war. So I think that's his place in the team. They all fit together in a very complicated way, and I think a lot of that is them, brushing off Wade's ego and trying to get him to realize that there's no room for it here because they're on this mission.
Yeah. So where Chris Evans and Captain America are America's ass, Wade is not America's ass.
He is America's ass.
But different.
But different.
American ass.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about Lucas Riggs.
So Lucas is our Australian character. He's an infantryman who fights in Africa. He's part of a famous unit called the Rats of Tobruk, who fought against the Nazis in the Africa campaign. And his whole thing is demolitions and explosives. Like, that's what he does, that's what he's good at. But he also, there's a lot of bad blood between the British and the Australians in the military in World War II. And the British did not treat the Australians particularly well. And so part of Lucas's journey and arc is having to confront what he believes is poor leadership and people making the wrong decisions, but they get to make them because they're in charge, and in getting his friends killed. And then ultimately that culminates in them eventually him being part of Arthur's team, Arthur also being a Brit, and how they kind of learn to find common ground and learn to trust each other, both as a leader and as a soldier following a leader. So yeah, Lucas has got a really interesting part, place in the team.
So let's talk writing for two mediums at the same time. We knew that it would be a challenge. We knew that it would be interesting, to say the very least. I mean, what was it like? I mean, is the strategy totally different from anything you've done before? Well, Sam, let me start with you. You've done comics for a while, and you've done games for a while. Like, combining the two for one cohesive story, what's that like?
Yeah, I think the great thing about games and game writing in particular is that it's such a collaborative medium. I mean, you get sometimes up to 1,000 people working on the same video game. I'm sure we certainly had hundreds and hundreds of people working on this game. And so you have a bunch of minds coming together to make something really, really good. And in comics, to a lesser degree, you do get that because you have a writer, and then you have an editor, and you have an artist. It's obviously a much smaller collaborative, color, letterer, inker, all that stuff. But it's a much smaller collaborative team, and usually there's only a single writer on the comic. So it's on that writer to come up with the whole story. I mean, in some cases they co-create with their artist who helps out. So there's that kind of like one-on-one collaboration. But most of the times when I'm writing comics, especially IP comics, like for Marvel or Star Wars or whatever, it's just me alone in a room being like, that'd be funny, like typing it up and then sending it off, hoping that someone likes it. What I really love about working in video games is the collaboration. Video games function much more like television in terms of writing, where you have this sort of collaborative writer's room. You put a team of really talented writers together, and then me, and then the internet would agree. And then you all get to brainstorm and create something together, and that was kind of the process on this comic. So we had already written and shot all of the performance capture scenes for the game. So all of the big stuff for the game was already written by the time we started working on the comic. So we had that sort of framework in place. And then what we did is we just sat down as a group, brainstormed what we wanted for the full arc, and then every time it came time for me to actually write an issue, we would have an hour-long brainstorm where we would all just sit down in a Zoom call and be like, what if we did this? And I would take notes for the hour, and we would just shoot ideas back and forth and plot it out page by page. Like on page 3 we'll see this, on page 4 we'll see this, and then I would take those notes away and translate that into script format. It was a really great experience because working on the game, you know, I primarily wrote all of Paulina's lines, and Tochi wrote Arthur's lines for the most part. We took ownership of each character individually, so if it had just been on me to write the whole thing, I probably wouldn't have gotten the same kind of nuance out of like Arthur's story that I did out of Paulina. So having that assistance from this team of people who had been living with these characters and breathing these characters for 2 years at this point was really invaluable, and we all got to like add to that narrative of the comic, and I loved that. I loved not having to be the only one coming up with stuff.
Well, I think, you know, jumping off of that too, I think what made this process unique was that we all come from different backgrounds in media. And there's already some like cross-pollination. So, you know, Sam, you know, she's got the crossover and the jump shot, but like, you know, she's just really good at comics. And like everything else, but like really good at comics. I come from a prose background, so novels, short stories. You know, Steven here.
She's also really good.
I mean,
Steven and I saw on the line people wanting to get your autograph because you can't hide it.
let me put my mask back on so y'all don't see me blush. You know, Steven like lives and breathes video games and like has that incredible foundation. So we all bring these different sensibilities in terms of how to tell a story into this project, and I think that makes it all the richer. And I think another thing too is sometimes when you're dealing in collaborative environments, you have to navigate egos, and sometimes what gets lost is, you know, serving the project, serving the story. And I think the wonderful thing about this was that we all loved the story and these characters so much that, you know, even though there were elements that we could sort of claim individual ownership for, or the things that we worked on the most, there was this collective sense of, we did this, right? Like, this whole thing, it's on all of us, right? And so I think that really, you know, that galvanized us, and that, I think, propelled us to make, you know, the best possible thing that we can make.
I totally agree. You know, I think, speaking specifically about how we wrote those comic issues, or how Sam, you wrote them, and kind of story development with you, it was, I think that phase was important because, you know, the issues it could have been, and like there was the fear that they might be very similar because it was always Butcher going to recruit someone and that story playing out. So having those kind of all come together with all the knowledge of the stuff we've done in the game and you know how those characters interacted, like, you know, how Butcher introduces himself to a character is almost one of the most important moments of each issue.
That was like the first thing we came up with
Yeah.
each issue was like, and then he's gonna parachute in on fire while like the world crumbles around him, and then we're like, that's dope. What's the rest of it though? And then we'd have to like build up the rest of the comic around it.
You only get to make one first impression.
I'm
I'm trying to
telling
make
you.
these first impressions to these crazy people, so it needs to be good.
It's like the Fast and Furious movies. Like the first one starts out, they're stealing VCRs out the back of trucks, and then by 7 they're dropping cars out of helicopters, and like and going into space, and like The Rock is redirecting a torpedo with his hand while like hanging out of a Jeep on ice, and like that was I think a lot of the spirit that went into Carver Butcher's appearances in these issues.
Butcher has a real rags to riches.
He was a vendor. Like, he was not an important character in Call of Duty World War II. He was like, you go buy some shit from him. Like, that was it. And now he's like, now if you go back and play Call of Duty World War II, you will know that he is the strongest man you've ever met. I guess he's now just taken up a part-time hobby of like selling stuff.
What I like about the way that you guys wrote how he introduces himself to everybody is he's there to make a very specific pitch, to recruit some of the dopest people in the war to be able to stop it, right? Like, that's a big thing. You can't just like show up and knock and be polite, like, hey Arthur, like, I've heard you're really cool, like, you want to come in the war with me? You can't do it. You gotta like, no spoilers, but let's play on that idea of the burning parachute. Like, it has to be bombastic in order for Arthur to look and be like, all right, this guy just risked his life to come and talk to me. I should hear him out, right? It's important. And then if you guys are probably flipping through the script. He takes on the world's deadliest sniper with a sniper. This dude's got, as my family would say, cojones. Like it's a big deal for him to do stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it helps to really sell the point. for you, you work on games for so long, and I know comics has always been something you loved. Was this the outlet you hoped for? Like, was it when you sat there for the first meeting with everybody, was it like, oh my God, I really hope this gets greenlit through and through because I want to do this?
Yeah, it definitely was, because it's, it's two parts, because I've always wanted to take my creative sort of experience into comics and start to do comics and write them. But then I also love the characters of Vanguard, and I love the story that we wrote for the game. So for me to get the chance to keep telling stories with these characters without any of the restraints of all the things that come from a high-end video game production, I was like, yes. When? How? Yes, immediately. And it's been great. It's been such an interesting experience and also like seeing the characters on the page and how we did the dialogue for the comic. I think gave you more of an insight into who the characters were, an angle that I hadn't really thought of yet. Because when we meet them in the comics, they're at a different part of their lives to when they are in the game. So it's we get to experience a slightly different Arthur and a slightly different Paulina. I think especially Paulina actually, because I can talk about this when you got the issue, but she's really in this issue. She's really kind of lost her way. She's clearly she's metamorphosized into this incredible sniper, and she's doing the good work on the Eastern Front. But it's not getting her what she wants. It's not fulfilling her in the way that I think she thought that it would. So Butcher going to her, the whole theme of that story is he's there to give her a way to really impact the war and actually make a difference with the skills that she's got. And it's a really interesting little story between those two characters of her, not wanting to like leave her home to go and do that, but also realizing that you can stay in Eastern Russia shooting Nazis all day, every day, and you're going to run out of bullets before you're like, right, I'm meant to kill. It's not going to impact the war as much as what she could do elsewhere. So yeah, it's been great.
Well, to your point about, I was just going to say to your point about this being sort of a guns down comic, not that there isn't a sniper shoot off in this one, because there obviously is, like we're gonna not do that. But I want to shout out Sledge and Activision for actually letting us create this comic with our vision, because a lot of the times what happens with video games, if they're gonna make a comic based on the IP, they outsource it and they hire outside talent and go to like an outside publisher, but Blizzard has its own in-house comic publishing unit, and the folks at Sledge and Activision recognized that like we could do this and had the trust in us to do this and allowed us as the team to create this instead of bringing in other folks. And that us being able to do this combined with the fact that we didn't have to rely on outside publishers really means that like we were allowed to make this kind of issue about a character like Paulina, which I think is really cool.
And I think it's important for media like this when it ties into something else that having the creators of the thing it's connected to also creating this, I think makes it so much, like, it just makes it better experience. Because you can hire writers and you can bring them up to speed and there's all the documentation, but you can only process so much information, whereas we could just jump on it day one and we already know everything we need to know. We've been in these characters' heads for so long, we could just go and start writing the issues. So I think a big shout out to Sledge and Activision for letting us do it the way we did and having our backs.
And also too, like I just want to take this moment also to like shout out Glenn, because he was instrumental in helping us figure out, and he's got this like wild TV background. Like as was mentioned earlier, he literally during the process for this got nominated for an Emmy. So he was, the sort of expertise that he brought to things and figuring out, not just individual character arcs, but structurally how some of this could come together was absolutely incredible, and I think speaks to what Stephen was saying about having that sort of knowledge of these characters and of their story going into this prequel story is invaluable. That's institutional knowledge right there, and I hope this can be a sort of object lesson to other places where if you developed that knowledge and developed that talent in-house, it makes sense to have these people involved in whatever other media you use to tell that story.
Yeah. Plus, we were wrapping up on the game script, and I personally didn't want us to stop working together. So I was finding any way that we could just keep working, and then the comic came along, and I was like, oh great, we get to do this for everyone else as well. So it was a nice like easing off of you know, talking to each other every day, so then potentially not.
We had a comic brainstorm meeting scheduled like every other Friday. We just have kept that.
Yeah.
Call our Van Day meeting.
Like the comic's done, but we're still.
Yeah, we still show up every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's enough slices.
Yeah.
It's exactly that. Yeah.
So let's talk more about the navigating a narrative mining build. What are some challenges that you saw of having a script that was mostly done already in game for now allowing an overflow into comics and narrative?
So the biggest issue, and it's one that we have to kind of skirt around today, for reasons, is that, you know, the comics take place at a certain point in the storyline. It's the prequel to our game, but our game also does some interesting things with time, and you know, we go with this team on this mission to Germany, but then we go back in time sometimes to kind of see where they came from. So that this takes place, the comic story takes place between those two elements that exist within the Call of Duty game story. So I think that was the trickiest thing to manage, is like making sure all of our ducks are in a row, and that we don't say anything in the comic that hasn't already happened in the game, or that might already happened in a level that people have played that was in the past that we could reference. So yeah, there was lots of detail, and I think that's another reason why it was so important that we were the team that did it, because we know that information.
There was a downside to that too, though, which is that it's sometimes difficult to remember that we know literally everything about these characters in the game, and you guys know nothing about it, because we would find ourselves brainstorming and being like, and then he says turducken, and we're all like, oh my god, that great inside joke. And then we're like, no, we can't, that's not gonna make any sense, like no one knows who this character is or what that joke is, like, and we have to kind of look at it with fresh eyes, like, does this character make sense to someone who's being introduced to this character for the first time, even though we also introduced this character for the first time in the game, because, you know, we have to recognize that people who are coming into the comic before playing the game, this is going to be their first time meeting these people, and same with people playing the game who aren't going to read the comic. We couldn't rely on the comic to establish these personalities. We have to have the game as like a standalone thing. So it was kind of difficult because we were so familiar with these characters already that like we had to almost step back from that a little bit.
Yeah. And with voice, you know, I mentioned earlier, voice was a thing because when you're playing with characters who exist within 3 different specific moments in time, you have to make sure that the voice matches who they are in those moments. And characters do change, especially characters who go through extreme scenarios, which is what this whole thing is about. You know, the war was an extreme scenario for everyone. So that was also a challenge to manage how we juggle those voices.
And also too, to tell a self-contained story. I mean, you know, ideally y'all buy the game and the comic, and get the comic. But also too, we didn't just want it to be that, you know, this story ends like right in the middle of a thing, and there's no like resolution or no like completion of character arcs or whatever. And then like, we didn't want it to be such a thing that like your understanding and appreciation of the comic was dependent on your engaging in another story entirely. Like we wanted it to be a situation where one would augment your experience and enjoyment of the other. And I think that was another thing that we had to sort of keep in mind, was that, you know, this is a specific story. And it's, you know, granted, it's a specific story that ties into another specific story very, very, very intimately and immediately, but it is a specific story. And I think that's another thing when writing across different media that you're constantly having to keep in mind, especially if you're operating in this sort of shared universe. Like, you want to be able to tell, like, Easter eggs, I love Easter eggs so much, but like, at the same time, I think if a story is being well told, your appreciation of that story is not absolutely contingent on you understanding every single Easter egg.
Yeah, I think you can read this comic and then immediately play the game and have a incredible experience and follow everything through. But I also think the way we've written the comic is you could also read it after the fact and then learn more and gain appreciation. I don't think it would dampen anything about the game experience. So I think
you know, I think it works in both ways.
Absolutely. How many issues of the comic are there? Or will there be? Also, just wanted to point out, the comics will be free.
Yes, yes, yes.
There's 6 issues.
6 issues.
Yeah, so you can keep an eye on that. And I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that the comic ends literally the second before the game starts.
Yeah.
They
That's a perfect time.
flow right into each other, which is cool.
In the comics, do we meet anybody that we don't get to know in the game? I'll give you a name. I'm leading the question because I know the answer. Not like,
I would say yes.
do we, okay,
Oh,
do we
yeah.
see anybody?
Be very cagey
Better,
right
right,
now. Be very cagey right
We're
now.
skirting around a secret 5th member of the team that no one knows about yet, who is personally my favorite character, inspired by my grandfather who did fight in World War II, who was a Slovak resistance fighter. But we can't really say too much more about him because he really is integral to the core of this team and like a big surprise in the game. But he does have his own issue of the comic, so definitely read that. We also don't get to meet the villains of our video game in the comic, so that's pretty exciting. But yeah, the 5th team member, our 5th secret team member, I can't tell you too much about it, but we love him.
Yeah, I hate that we can't talk about it because it's my favorite issue.
Is it really?
It's my favorite cover idea, like through and through. I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's really
Yeah.
good. That one was the most challenging to write too.
Yeah, that one was tough.
Yeah.
Well, because we're elaborating so much more on a story that you don't touch on enough, right? Like you
Yeah.
want to say so much more. And that's a perfect example of the overflow where the comics really help. You can elaborate on a story, so it's investment, right? Like I like to know the history of the characters that I'm playing as, and when there's not enough narrative in a game, I feel detached. You know? Well, I guess it depends on the day too, because like when my AD is at its highest, I'm skipping through all the dialogue. But oh god, I'm sorry, I'm in a room full already. But yeah, like being able to learn more about some of these characters through this has just been immensely fulfilling. And that's what we wanted from day one, was to be able to paint a more complete picture. And I think we really achieved that.
I mean, and it helps that we created such compelling characters. Like, these are all compelling characters. You could fill a story with, like, characters that on paper have interesting stories or whatever, but that just don't really, pull you in whatever media, whether it's, video games, whether it's a comic, whether it's, movie or TV. There could be other things that are really dope about that story. Oh, it's shot very beautifully, or, oh, like, I really like the weapon selection here, or what have you, but in this story, in the game, and particularly in the comic, our characters drive everything. And I think because we loved them so much and found them so compelling in one media, we knew that this was not going to be the last and only time that we experienced them. We had to be with them again.
Like between you and I, folks in this room and us, like we came into this process saying, how do we make the iconic COD characters? Because we don't really have that in Call of Duty right now. When you think about a game like, I don't know, Halo, you think of Master Chief or whatever, but when you think of COD, there isn't really that standout, like, oh, these characters. And so we came into this being like, who could be our sort of like flagship COD characters? Because we want to make Vanguard 2 and Vanguard 3, because we have 2 more stories that we really want to tell with these characters. So we are hoping that if people love them as much as we do, that we get to continue to tell the story of these people and make them sort of like figureheads for this era of COD, basically. So I don't know, it would be super dope. But
That info, by the way, is a Comic-Con exclusive.
yeah.
We have never said that.
Literally
publicly.
nobody else knows like what makes 2 more games. I'm sorry, Steven. I just like blew your cover there. But like, we really want to make more
really
Vanguard, man. Like, we just are so passionate about these characters. Like, there's so many more stories to tell. And even if we can't make more games, maybe more comics, because like it's just
Yeah,
we want to spend time
I
with
think
them.
that's the thing that I take away, is that no matter what happens with the actual games themselves, because Call of Duty is this enormous machine of.
We are very tiny
It's,
cogs.
I think we've created characters that we love enough where we'll want to find ways to tell stories with them, and you know, I think,
Like anything you can
yeah,
do.
and I think Activision like them enough, and Sledgehammer love them, so I think it's, you know, I think there's opportunities out there to keep telling their stories, but what form it'll take, no idea.
Yeah, I mean, we the point's been made already on the panel, but, we've had buy-in in-house, right? Like, people throughout studios are like, okay, we want to see more of this. The missing ingredient is y'all. Once we get buy-in from y'all, all bets are off. It's a Reynolds wrap, like mission accomplished. And so that's sort of why, so much of this wonderful thing that we've built is contingent on y'all's support. Like, whether it's getting the game, whether it's getting the comic.
We're showing up here today.
Exactly. So like, thank you. But like, that's the missing ingredient. That's the secret sauce. Because without y'all, like, this doesn't happen. So please don't let this flop.
I think a lot of what you guys are saying too is, it's a testament of how passionate the people behind this, really are, right? Like,
Yeah, I think it can be easy to think of COD as like a machine, and the people who make it are just like, oh, I'm throwing it up. But like, it's such a passion project for us, and we got to tell a story that like is so meaningful to us.
and that's why it's so important for us to be right here, right now, right? Like, this isn't a commercial. This isn't like, you're not seeing us behind the screen, giving you a pitch. You're hearing the hearts of the writers who really and truly give a shit about these characters and give a shit about this game. Like, a lot went into this, and it's real, it's authentic, So being able to see you guys continue the story after the fact, I think was like such an awesome moment. Even if from an outside, looking in, but it's been dope, and obviously, my hope too is that we can continue the story as long as we need to complete it.
Well, I think this is an amazing thing that we've created, with Piotr and this team. But like, I think when people
And Brad.
and I think when people play the game, that like everyone at Sledgehammer and all the other studios have helped to build that. I think when they experience that, that's gonna blow people's minds.
I mean, what was that like for you guys? Like, playing through the multiplayer alpha and the beta, seeing and hearing the quips, right? Hearing your characters speaking, getting shot at.
Never gonna get used to it.
It's crazy. I was on a convention tour when the first story trailer dropped, and I was like at a friend's house who's right here, and I was like, you have to play through a bunch of Call of Duty so I can watch this trailer on the TV. And so she sat there dutifully and played like the COD multiplayer because I was like too nervous to play it so I could watch it, and I cried. I like cried a bunch. And it's just crazy to be a part of something like Call of Duty. Like, Call of Duty sells like 40 million copies. Nothing I ever work on in my life until I die will probably be seen or experienced by as many people as will experience this game.
Literally, so like,
Very humbling and crazy to think about.
there have been a lot of really dope things that have happened over the course of my career. Maybe one of the dopest was telling my brother on, I think it was that Wednesday, just, for no reason whatsoever, just make sure you're logged in Warzone, around like 1:30 or so. Just, no reason, just make sure you're logged in, that you're playing, you're doing your thing, just like, make sure you're logged in. And then when he saw that trailer, fam, I became the coolest older brother in the entire world. So thank you for that.
We're gonna open it up to a Q&A. If you guys have any questions, line up on either side. We have about 10 minutes.
So do you feel like the fantasy and empowerment that's expected from the typical COD game limits the realm of narrative possibility? And if so, do comics allow you to get out of that player agency paradigm? And also, sorry, second question, but when you're writing for a game, do you start from the feeling that you want the gameplay to evoke in people and build the story after that? Or do you try to change the feel of the mechanics through it?
I can tackle the first part of the question, which is,
Yeah, you are super, in video games, the narrative serves the gameplay largely. I mean, really good games are co-created together, but at the end of the day, like, a game has to be fun to play, especially a game like this. And so, if the narrative hinders that in any way, you have failed as a game writer, because you have to make sure that it's supporting good gameplay first and foremost. Plus, there are engine, VFX limitations. My favorite example of this is like, I want to make a video game and I want to make it about 17 unicorns. And my guy said, oh, we only have a rig for goats. So we sort of came to the game as about 17 goats. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's okay. And then somebody else is like, listen, the engine can only render one sprite on screen at a time. So it can actually be about one goat. And now your story about 17 unicorns is about one goat. And you're just like, yay! And that's part of the fun of writing for video games, is fitting into these like weird narrative challenges that have to serve the greater game. But in a comic, you don't have those limitations besides pissing off your artist who doesn't want to draw 17 unicorns for you, but will do it ultimately, and then never work with you again. So yes, you are a lot freer to tell a kind of narrative-based story. There's also a lot more room for slower-paced moments, because I will tell you that it is very difficult to convince higher ups to put slow moments into video games, because they're very kinetic and they're all about action. And when you slow that down even for a second, there's a sense that you lose momentum. So that's why this was sort of our like guns down story, so we could have a little bit more emotion and take time to, like, you know, talk, whatever, more.
Talk through our feelings.
Here's the thing, if you're filming a PCAP scene and you're spending like $1 bazillion on it, if you hand your director a script that's just like two people crying at each other, they're gonna be like, why the fuck am I paying for this? Like, where are the explosions? Where are the guns? Where's the value that I'm getting out of this? Let's make some dope shit with like our CGI. Not really an issue here. So that's my answer to the first question.
Did you just talk about the creation of Goat Simulator?
That's how we got the critically acclaimed Goat Simulator.
What was the second part of the question?
Yeah, there was nothing about how comics are different, and you don't get as much of that feeling of empowerment because of the medium. And then, if you're writing for a game, do you start from the feeling that you want gameplay to evolve, or do you try to tame the mechanics that we're used for?
Oh, team mechanics, I like that term. It's more of a...
Never say that to gameplay design.
It's a collaboration for sure, you know, like usually a game will be an idea of like, okay, we want to do, you know, so with Vanguard it's like, okay, we want to do World War II, and we want to do like multiple theatres, we don't want to just stay within Europe, and then it's like, we want this and we want this, and then it's kind of, you know, you let the design and the mechanics teams figure out what boxes they want to play in, and then I think that's when we start to come in and look at, okay, well, what story are we going to tell with these boxes? Because we can't, if we just come in and go, you know, using the unicorn thing, okay, this is this year's Call of Duty, it's going to have 17 unicorns in it. People are going to be like, well, we're not doing that.
How do you build that? What does that game look like?
We have a plan for that.
Is it a murder mystery game with 17 unicorns, or is it a shooter?
Video games is still catching up to the fact that narrative is important a little bit. I think what you'll see in games where narrative is not particularly successful is that it got made by building all of the gameplay first, and then going, hire a writer to slap the story on.
Yeah, that's still unfortunately very common, but you know, the places that have figured it out, which
Yes.
has, is that they figure out what the core boxes for the game, what the core mechanics are going to be, or the set pieces that they want to try and achieve, or the feeling even is important, and then we'll start to build a story around those things. It's like core pillars.
And then we can also ask for mechanics. So as opposed to saying limiting them, we can ask for like, do you want to put in QTEs? Do you want the story to be told in XYZ way? You know, we can say like, I really want a moment that's like this, can we make that? And then everyone will be like, yes, or no, you're fired. Great.
That was awesome.
Thanks for your question.
Thank you.
Hi. So my question is, I got to meet Sam yesterday at our panel. Just big fan of all of you guys' work. As someone who's just really like striving to be a video gamer myself, I actually applied for Sledgehammer about 3 times this year so far. But as someone who just loves the stories of Call of Duty, something that I've always been particularly fond of is how the stories progress over like the several months after release with each of their seasons. Like not only do you have to write about like as awesome as your guys' campaigns are, but also you have to tell this like a progressive story that evolves over several months, whether it be through multiplayer, Warzone, zombies, and you have your struggle. I can't imagine how hard it must be to make like all these brand new characters to stand up to some of like the biggest ones I've called these are made like Captain Price, Soap, Mason, Samantha Maxis, and just how does that work for you? Like, I can assume that you're also in the process of writing still for the game as it's going on through its original seasons. Like, are you still writing in that charge of that, or are you just doing the initial campaign and comic?
No, we're still writing for the post-launch content, I guess. You know, we've
Yeah.
got a storyline planned for Vanguard's live season that will take place throughout the next 12 months.
And there are a whole team of game writers beyond us who work in Sledgehammer who are working very
I have a whole team back at the studio who isn't here, but working very hard still on that content. But yes, I won't say much more about it because obviously there's not been any details revealed about what's going to be in that, but the story will continue.
All right,
It's a lot of work, and that's why you have a big writing team on you.
And I already tell you, I'm gonna make sure personally it doesn't flop. I already pre-ordered the Ultimate Edition. Gonna make sure to buy tons of bundles in the store just to make sure you guys get to tell the story you want to be told.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you.
My question is for Sam, but it extends to everybody. As somebody who's been on the writing team for one of my favorite games of the last 5 years, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, Game of the Year 2021 hands down, and somebody who's a part of another game that I'm planning on picking up, which is Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. What is it like navigating a minefield of a different sort in terms of having to write, and depending on how much time you have to writing for a lot of different themes and navigating a lot of different story elements for completely different worlds. You think of like
I joke about this all the time because I write kids comics and all ages comics a lot of the time, and like Ratchet and Clank and stuff. Where a lot of my time working on this game was like in the morning. I would spend the morning writing like a Captain Marvel comic for 8-year-olds, and in the afternoon it'd be like graphic, violent Nazi death, where I'd like write graphic descriptions of like people getting their throat cut for the comic and stuff. And honestly, it's great because I do a lot of different jobs. I write all of the time, and if I was writing all stuff that was one note, I think it would all start to blend into each other and start to feel really monotonous and samey, and also make me feel really burnt out. The great thing about jumping around to something really, really funny, primarily like Borderlands, something like this, something for kids, is that even though, yes, it is all writing, it's all me sitting at my computer typing, every single thing is so different that it like keeps my brain interested and moving and pulling from different sources of inspiration. So that's a really great question though. It can feel a little schizophrenic at times, I'll be honest with you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Well, I have a question for all of you. And Tech too. First is when you write a story, do you ever like burnt out or like have like writer's block, and how do you overcome that? And the second part is when you also write a story, like for this one, is do you use any like previous base stories you know of to help?
I mean, so the first part, I always get right a lot, but I just sort of power through it. For me, it's important to get the first draft of anything done as fast as possible, even if I'm just writing garbage on page. Doesn't matter.
Usually is for me.
Yeah.
I mean, not for me though.
Those are perfect and you're
I literally.
Well,
share.
for us mere mortals who do this, I just try and get through the draft. I do a lot of planning as well, a lot of outlining, so I'm not trying to find my way as I go, so I kind of know my rough beats, and then I kind of just write that first draft down, and then it's just a case of endlessly rewriting it, and polishing it up. What was the second part again?
Second part was when you write a story, do you use any previous stories you know or like base upon to help you write?
Yeah, I steal from everything.
Or great writers. I stole that.
Anything I've watched, anything I've read, anything I saw happen on the street one time, any conversation I overheard passing by two people, and anything and everything is fair game. So if you're friends with writers, be careful what you tell them, because they'll end up in something.
Yeah, and make sure you don't donate a kidney. Let writers know about it. But I will also say too, like as a writer in various other stories, I cannibalize myself all the time.
Oh yeah.
So I have a book coming out in January, Goliath, and there are parts of Goliath that existed back in like 2013. So I think one of the important things that you can, sort of internalize as a writer is that nothing's wasted. Nothing's wasted. You may, crap out a draft of something and think, oh, like that's just wasted time and effort. No, you may end up coming back to that months from now, years from now, a decade from now, and being like, okay, the very essential piece that I'm missing for this story that I'm working on now, I actually wrote a decade ago. So you know, that I think is another important thing to remember, is that nothing is wasted.
I want to get this last question in.
Thanks, I'll be a quick one. Is there anything that you wanted to include in a comic or the game script that you really wanted to include, but Sledgehammer, maybe the team, or someone said absolutely not, can't do it? And if so, can you share it?
The turducken line.
Every like dumb idea I had, they were like, yeah, for both the comic and the game. Like it was such a positive environment.
I feel like there is I can't say what it is, I'm sorry, but there was a scene in the game, I think, that it was we probably went too far with it, I think.
Oh yeah.
And then we pulled back on it a little bit, because I think it was great, and everyone who did the performances in that scene did a fantastic job, but I think we realised it was maybe just a bit too much, so we ended up pulling back on that a little bit. But yeah, can't really talk about it. And you won't notice in the game because now, like the way the scene's done is it's still great. It's just we changed we made it shorter and tweaked a few lines here and there. But I think it ended up better. I do think we just went too far with it.
I wanted all the bodies on the cover.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely just super proud of what we were able to pull off here. And we were working for some real like enablers.
Well, and I think Steven's point proves the point that they actually let us try anything.
Yeah.
Like anything we came up with, they were like, yeah, don't shoot it, let's try it. And if it didn't work, then we would get to redo it. But they did let us try whatever we wanted, which is very cool.
Yeah, one thing that's super just cool about Sledge leadership in general, and then everybody on the Activision side that's been working with us, is they hire people they trust, right? So then it's like they set it up and then kind of like get out of the way, and it's very rare that they'll need to cause a pivot, but it's always up for discussion. It's always broken down. We're always in the know of why and what the thought is, and then we pivot together, right? Like it's always collaborative.
Yeah, it's been a great collaboration, like at every level. I think I've always felt like we've had the studio and the company support from day one with this game. Even though we were doing some different things for Call of Duty and we were trying different things, I think it's paid off. And I think they see that, so that's nice.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you everybody
Thank you.
who came today. This is awesome. Yes.
I am a
What is your name?
Sam.
Great t-shirt.
Yeah. Do you work for Sledge?
Maybe. Yeah, no, okay, I'm kidding. Where can people find this comic and like where can they get it?
The comic is going to drop within the next few weeks. It's definitely before the game launches. You'll be able to find it on callofduty.com. More info coming. Pay attention to the Sledge handles as soon as it's ready. As soon as we're confident that your viewer experience is going to be super dope. It's going to be free and it's going to be accessible. So what questions are there?
I'm going to do Paulina.
And we're going to do a bind day once all the
Spring, I think we'll
Yeah,
print it
it's
and
spring.
then like have a physical copy so my mom can buy it.
Yeah, late winter, early spring. You'll hear about it. We'll shout it from the rooftop. But thank you everybody for coming. We enjoyed it.